Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Dram Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Right, as I said last week when I was doing the gin episode of the show, we'll be looking at Genever this week. Now, a number of you are probably wondering just what Genever actually is. Now, it is, I suppose you could say, it's a form of gin, and some people believe it was the forerunner to gin, but essentially it's made in primarily in Holland, Belgian, certain areas of France, and some parts of Germany. It I believe records of the production of Genever date back to the sort of 1490s, and like a lot of early sort of spirit production, it was pretty rustic stuff. I mean, if you think about the sort of early history of whiskey, that was pretty rough stuff and generally flavoured with roots and herbs and spices and things like that to make it sort of somewhat palatable. And as far as I'm led to believe, Genever is no different to that, and certainly it was marketed as a sort of medicinal tonic in the 1600s. Now, apparently, the first, shall we say, known record in inverted commas was produced by Professor Sylvius de Boeuf, although there is some disputing as to whether he was the originator of it or not. He was apparently supposed to have formulated a recipe for it in 1575, although I have read in some places that in actual fact he wasn't born until the 1600s, so probably, like a lot of history, shall we say, it was probably well, it wasn't invented, but it makes a good story, shall we say. But anyway, so here we have Genever. It is generally made from several different grain types. It's generally made from corn, rye, and malted barley, and essentially you have three different types of Genever. You have Jong or Young Genever, Oude or Old, and Corenwijn, which I think is corn wine. I think it means corn wine. Now they don't these terms don't reflect the age of the spirit. In actual fact, it's the style, the production style, and up until I believe the Great War, it was mainly made from sort of a mash of those three grains. But obviously, after the First World War, there was a distinct shortage of grains, and I believe the spirit was made from practically anything that they could get their hands on. I imagine sort of sugar beet, molasses, sugar, that kind of stuff, and so there became I don't think it was sort of like formally classified until a lot later, but people would refer to the young and the old style of Genever. Nowadays it has actually sort of have a legal basis, and young Genever can only contain a minimum of 15% malted barley, whereas Oude Genever must contain a minimum of 15% up to 50% of malted barley. And then you have Corenwijn, which is a minimum of 51% of malted barley up to 70%, but we're not looking at one of those today. We're just looking purely at Genever. I mean, you look at the history of the spirit. I mean, certainly the Dutch were probably quite preeminent in the large-scale production of spirit, and certainly between 1500 and 1700, most major cities would have a number of different distilleries that would produce this stuff, and allegedly Genever came. I mean, because obviously the Dutch, as you know, were seafaring nation, empire. They exported Genever all over the world, including in Britain, and it really didn't sort of apparently take hold in Britain until William III took the throne of England in 1689, and that's when sort of British producers or English producers started producing a Genever, which eventually became gin. It became a lighter style, and this is the difference between Genever and gin. Generally speaking, Genever tends to be oilier. It's more about the spirit character, the base spirit character, less about the botanicals. So the reality is that in actual fact, the only sort of common ground that Genever and gin actually shares is the fact that they use juniper as one of the botanicals. Aside from that, I think they're pretty different, and hopefully this episode of the show will show you that. And so what we're going to be looking at this afternoon, well, I've got Genevers from 3 different producers, and we're looking at one from the Rutte family distillery, which obviously I waffled a little bit about last week, so I won't bother sort of going over that one again. And we'll be looking at 2 others. Two of them are probably the most well known of the Genever producers, or certainly family owned Genever producers. The first is Zuidam distillers. They were formed in 1975 by Fred van Zuidam, who had a fairly small distillery with 1 pot still, which has now over the years enlarged to, I believe, 4 pot stills and a larger distillery. The company is currently run by Fred's sons, Patrick and Gilbert, and possibly the most, well, aside from obviously the quality of their spirits, probably the most interesting thing about the distillery is that all the cereals are milled using windmills, which was apparently historically how it was done in Holland. And the other distillery we'll be looking at is from Belgium. Like I said, it's not just, and a lot of people do seem to think that Genever is purely a Dutch spirit. Yes, the Dutch make an awful lot of it, but Belgians make it as well. And we're looking at the Filliers, one of their range of Genevers. Now, Filliers is an older company, and I believe it was established in 1880. Although I think the originator of the company, Karel Lodwig Filliers, introduced the concept of making Genever to the family business in 1792. I don't know exactly what the family business was, but I think it had something to do with agriculture, probably sort of farming, I would imagine. Some notable points in its history are in 1880 he bought a steam engine to increase the production of Genever. And in 2006 the distillery was finished complete modernisation, and is now quite swanky and modern, but also retains the original distillery, so it's obviously got some historical connection and all that kind of stuff. It's currently run by the 5th generation of the family, and like all of these distilleries, producers, not only do they do Genevers, they do gin, they do liqueurs, and obviously a whiskey. I believe that sort of Filliers are the company behind Goldie's, the first Belgian whiskey, which I think I have tasted in the past. And of course, obviously, as you probably know, Zuidam are well known for the Millstone range of whiskies and rye that they produce. So that's kind of a very, very brief and potted history of Genever production. I think we'll just introduce this afternoon's lineup then, shall we? Okay, so we're going to kick off this afternoon's tasting looking at the young style of Genever. And we'll be looking at the Zuidam Young Genever. This is, like I said, made from a mash of rye, corn and malted barley, so obviously no more than 15% malted barley. It is obviously unaged and bottled at 35%. I'm going to move on to look at the Rutte Old Simon Genever. This is bottled as well at 35%. I'm guessing from the term Old Simon that this is an old style Genever, so we're expecting probably a little bit more malty character in that, but we shall obviously, well, we shall see. Third one we'll be looking at is quite interesting. It's called the Rogge Genever, Rogge meaning rye, so this is 100% rye Genever, aged for 1 year, I believe in a combination of American and French oak, Limousin oak in actual fact, which is what I think all the Zuidam Genevers are aged in. Then we shall be moving on to the 3-year-old Oude Genever. This is bottled at 35% and only available in 35 cl bottles, but still really, really well priced. Second to last, we should be looking at the Zuidam 5-year Oude Genever. Obviously, same mash bill, just spends a couple of extra years in cask, so that will be quite interesting. And then finally, we'll be looking at the one and only sample I have of Filliers, which is their 15-year-old Oude Genever. This is bottled at 38.6%. So, and interestingly enough, I don't know what the mash percentages are of the other ones, but certainly the Filliers is 50% malt and 50% rye, so putting it right at the top end of the what's legally allowed with regards to Oude Genever. So I think it's going to be quite interesting. Hopefully we shall see sort of the progression, certainly not only in the young and old styles, but obviously the progression, and see what happens when this particular spirit is aged in oak. Generally speaking, I think certainly the Zuidams, I believe, are triple distilled, and then they macerate the botanicals in them and then distill it for a 4th time. So it's very subtle on the herbal and juniper kind of characters, but obviously we shall see when we get on to tasting them. So so let's get on and taste them then, shall we? Okay, so let's kick off with the young grain Genever then, shall we? Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Very crisp. Got a lovely kind of slightly dark rye character. Sort of reminds me a little bit of a soft sort of grain whiskey. It's certainly got a sort of a grainy, slightly high-toned kind of character. There's a little bit of maltiness, a little biscuitiness. There's again the botanicals are very, very subtle. I believe they tend to use nuts, which certainly kind of has a slight sort of vanilla-y, nutty kind of character. A little bit of juniper, touch of cinnamon possibly. Some spice, but what I love about this is all about the character of the spirit, and like I said with the gins, I like to know where, you know, or at least get an intimation, shall we say, of what the base spirit is made from, and you can certainly get it from this. It has that rye character. There's a little bit of malt, even a little bit of kind of slightly fat corn underneath it. It's actually got some really lovely complexity. Palate. Quite sweet. I'm getting the sort of fat corn, sort of pseudo vanilla up front. Now I don't know if this is sweetened post distillation. Apparently, within the sort of legislative framework of Genever, you can use sugar and you can sweeten, and it certainly has a little bit of a sweetness, so kind of taking the edge a little bit off the rye, but it's got a lovely sort of slightly perfumed, crisp, grainy kind of finish. A little bit of dark rye, a little bit of malt, and very finely you get, you know, a kind of an intimation of juniper and nuts and spice. So to be honest with you, I mean, sort of character-wise, it has probably more in common with a sort of like an interesting vodka, in that you know, it's closer in style to that than it is, in my opinion, to gin. I mean, certainly it doesn't have the intensity of juniper and botanicals that you would find in gin, and has a lovely kind of spirit character. So yeah, nice one to start with, I think. Okay, so let's move on to the Old Simon. Let's see if this is old, Oude, or Jong. Let's see anyway. Well, it's definitely got quite a malty character, so I would guess this is definitely Oude style. Really, very malty, really interesting. It has a sort of almost kind of balsamic, kind of slightly treacly character. It's a lot deeper than the young grain. A little bit of rye spice coming through, but it's almost perfume, but not quite. It's really interesting. It's a kind of malty perfume, I suppose, if you like. Nicely crisp. A little bit of slightly nutty, a little bit of spice, touch of juniper. But again, it's all about the character of the spirit, not so much about the botanicals. Oh. Again, really real malt wine finish. A little bit of sort of fat corn, sort of pseudo vanilla-y kind of character. It's certainly not got any oak character. It's pretty much well, looking at the colour, it certainly hasn't spent any time in oak. Again, very subtle juniper right on the finish. More about, like I said, the character of the spirit, slightly nutty. Really malty, a little bit of a balsamic-y kind of note there, sort of just giving it a little bit of an edge. You know, it's not sort of soft and fluffy, but it's not too sort of edgy, shall we say. So yeah, nicely balanced, I think. Really pleasant. Okay, so let's move on to the Rogge Genever then. Let's see what this gives us. Now, this is now where we're starting to get a little bit more whiskey-like in character. It's lighter. There's just a smidgen of vanilla. But there's lots of sweet, dark rye. A little bit of sweet spice. It's very subtle. I must admit, I'm not getting a huge amount of botanicals. Again, it's got a slightly nutty kind of note, but it's pretty much all about the rye spirit. And really interesting it is too. Palate. More oak on the palate, sort of almondy, nutty, slightly marzipan-like. Probably a little bit more in the way of botanicals, certainly kind of coming through on the end with a slight mentholated note. And one thing I have noticed about aging, specifically gins in oak, is it seems to make the botanicals certainly more mentholated. Sometimes quite subtly, other times quite intense. Lovely, warm, spicy rye finish to this particular one. Full, slightly sweet, but has a little bit of sort of bittering kind of rye notes, which kind of balance that up. So again, really interesting. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the 3-year-old Zuidam then. Let's see what the nose gives us. now we're getting a lot more oak. 3 years and it's got this much oak, but I would guess that they're probably using first fill, or if not very new oak, because it's certainly got a real intensity of toasty American oak character. Almost, you know, blind, you could almost get away with being a rye whiskey. There's a lot of that sweet and spicy dark rye, big vanillas. I must admit, I'm not getting a huge amount of botanicals. There is a little bit, again, very subtle, very in the background. I mean, if you love American whiskey, you'd probably love this. I mean, certainly with all that American oak, it's definitely coming across like that. There is a real toastiness to it, really nice. So some sweet vanilla, a little bit of almost kind of coconutty, nutty almond. Ooh. All that from 3 years, that's really impressive, has to be said. There's a little bit of grainy oak, which I'm guessing is probably the French oak, as it often tends to sort of impart a more sort of grainy tannin spice note. But the American oak certainly is the dominant characteristic of this particular nose. Yeah, there's some nice herbal notes kind of going on in the background, and a little bit of quite sweet juniper coming through now. That's really nice, really well balanced. I'm really impressed with this. Palate. Ooh, a lot of oak, which I'm not surprised about. Really coconutty, almond, lovely spiciness, sort of combination of kind of wood spice, rye spice, a little bit of sweet juniper right on the very finish, a little bit of cinnamon possibly, sort of that kind of sort of sweeter spice coming through right on the very end. The alcohol balances really well. I mean, it's bottled at 38, and I think it just needed that little bit of extra alcohol to kind of just give the spices a little bit more of a kick. Certainly to kind of counterbalance the sweetness of the oak. I think if that had been bottled at maybe 35%, I think it would have been a lot too sweet, a lot more oakier, I should say. So I think that just about right. I mean, maybe if it had been bottled at 40%, but then you're sort of starting to look, well, it's starting to get a bit pricey then, isn't it, when you sort of add in that extra 2% alcohol. But I think, you know, just really well balanced, and I think if you like American ryes, if you like sort of like that sort of really intense, fresh American oak character, then you'll love this. So definitely worth trying. Moving on to the 5-year-old, let's see if this has ramped up the oak character then, shall we? Actually, surprisingly not. This has just gone the other way. You would have thought 5 years in American oak, you know, if that's what 3 years does to it, 5 years is going to make it a monster, but no. I can only assume that they're probably using more refill casks to age their spirit for longer. Otherwise it would just be utterly oak dominated. But this has got a lovely sort of whiskey like kind of character, quite a bit of malt I can get, some almost kind of orange notes, citrus, again sort of lovely spicy rye, but also some sweet rye notes as well. So this is, I think you could probably argue, slightly better balanced. It's not so intensely oaky, more whiskey like, and again, yes, there's a sort of a touch of juniper and some herbal notes in the background. well, it's got a lovely round character, lovely elegant character. Palate? There's a touch more oak on the palate, with that sort of toasty vanilla creaminess. Also a little bit more corn as well. I'm getting sort of a little bit more of that sort of, you know, fleshy fat corn notes. The rye seems to be sort of like a little bit sort of subdued, shall we say, underneath all of that, but it is there. It gives you a little bit of spice, and again a little bit of juniper, a little bit of sweeter spice on the finish, but still really, really nicely balanced. Quite a dry tannic finish. Maybe that's, you know, the tannins are now starting to kind of leach out and they're sort of starting to come through a bit more. But again, it's balanced quite nicely by the slightly more coconutty sweet vanilla, and sort of the corn notes certainly are adding another level of balance as well. So that's really impressive. That is really very, very nice. And finally, we're going to move on to the 15-year-old. Look at the colour of that, will you? I mean, that's dark. I mean, that's taken some oak character. So let's see what the nose gives us on this end. Oh, that is wonderful. Really malty. It's kind of like the Old Simon, but kind of amplified, I suppose. It has that sort of, you know, malt wine kind of note character. Lovely, lovely, intense, dark, spicy rye. Slightly medicinal, well, more in that kind of mentholated herbal kind of character. Marzipan, old marzipan, kind of almost kind of sort of fermented marzipan, I suppose. Really complex, really winey, very malty, but then not surprised when you consider it's 50% malt and 50% rye. You'd expect it to be really malty, and it certainly delivers all of that. Again, the oak is quite mature. It's sitting in the background. It's got some nice tannin notes coming through, bit of dusty spice. There's a touch of juniper again. That's lovely, delightful. Palate. That's lovely. Again, really malty and whiskey-like. Some dry tannins, a little bit of, well, more than a little bit of spicy rye, quite a lot of spicy rye, dark, spicy, slightly herbal rye, bit of juniper. God, that is just superbly good. Really, really whiskey-like. I mean, although there was, like I said, a little bit more oak character on the palate, it's certainly all really nicely balanced, and the spirit is certainly not kind of overwhelmed by the oak whatsoever. So, yeah, that's really nice. That's impressive. Okay, so let's sum this little tasting up. Really, really interesting. So, what have we learned about Genever? Probably doesn't have a huge amount in common with gin at all in reality. Certainly sort of unaged Genever certainly has more of an affinity to things like vodka. Certainly when the botanicals are pretty subtle, and oak aged Genever certainly has more in common with, well, depending upon what casks you've aged it in, probably more in common with either sort of American whiskey or just whiskey in general. So yes, it has juniper, but you know that is not the sort of like the predominant character of the spirit. So going through them, the Zuidam Young Genever, yeah, really nice, loads and loads of spirit character. Just yeah, that's just kind of like Genever, almost sort of, you know, textbook, just really nice. The Old Simon, yeah, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was, you know, all right. I might have not rubbished their gins, but not been a great fan of their gins. Certainly, their Genever is just absolutely spot on, old style Genever, really malty and just very impressive. The Rogge Genever, yeah, okay, it's nice. It's interesting. There was a lot of rye kind of character. There was a bit of oak. It was, yeah, pleasant. It certainly, I didn't think was the strongest of the Zuidam bottlings that I tasted today, but certainly there was absolutely nothing wrong with it at all. The 3 and the 5-year-old, well, the 3-year-old was, you know, real like oak monster. Like I said, if you like your sort of American whiskies, your American ryes, you would kind of love that. I mean, it's just, you know, a lot of oak. Maybe it's not kind of like classic old Genever, certainly not in the Old Simon kind of mould. Maybe it's trying to be slightly more modern, trying to sort of appeal to you know, that type of drinker, possibly. Certainly, I think it's really nice, and certainly, you know, I would certainly drink it. I think of the two, I think the 5-year-old is probably the better balance. Maybe sort of they're using refill casks. Certainly a lot less oak kind of character and a lot more spirit character, and you know, exceptionally well balanced. And the Filliers, well, I mean, yes, I suppose at 15 years old, it was always going to be the most impressive bottling. A lot more of everything in actual fact. But again, you know, I think they all had their sort of interesting characteristics, and certainly maybe they're kind of tailored to sort of certain individuals. You can see that, you know, there's certain individuals that would like each of these different sort of styles. So kind of, you know, quite a broad appeal, shall we say, which is quite nice. And like I said, you know, they all have some juniper kind of character, but certainly nothing at all like you would find in your average gin. So so there you have it. That's completely different, completely off the wall kind of tasting, and I thought, you know, I think it's really interesting. So hopefully this will, you know, if you like the sound of one or other of these particular Genevers, you'll you know, go try and find them and check them out. So anyway, I think that's enough of that for this afternoon. So all that's left to say is good dramming and good afternoon.